Shalom everyone, I hope you are well. This week's Parsha is Parshas Noach, the second Parsha of the Chumash. In this Parsha we learn about the Mabul and Noach, and at the end of the Parsha we have a very interesting section that's quite hard to understand. The Torah tells us about a generation of people, it's called the Tower of Babel, the generation of the Tower of Babel, who got together to create a city, an edifice, a tower that would reach up to heaven, would create an identity, na'asa lanu shem, an identity for themselves that somehow would outlast God and would cause them not to become separated and spread around. And Hashem, God's response to this was, on the contrary, to cause them to speak different languages and to spread around. And it's very hard to understand what this whole section is about. I saw a beautiful explanation from Reb Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, a great German commentator, scholar, who was also in the German parliament in the mid-1800s. He was a tremendous visionary and leader who basically single-handedly saved so much of German Jewry in the 1800s. And he writes that what these verses are talking about is something that's essential to what Judaism is about. In life, we often have a concept of the individual, and we have societies that are built around individualistic ideas, that it's about the individual. Much of Western society has this concept. America was built on this concept in many ways. And then you have other societies that are, we would call it collectivist societies, where it's more about the community. It's not about the individual, but the focus is on the sense of community. The focus is on whether you belong. The focus is on how do you fit into the larger society. And Rav Hirsch points out that Judaism, the Torah, is like many other places. The concepts of the Torah are built not about one extreme or another, but about finding a harmony between the two. Just like physical and spiritual, Judaism says that it's not about living a pure physical life or a pure spiritual life, but about finding integration between the physical and spiritual worlds and uplifting the physical to its spiritual essence. So too, when it comes to individualism versus collectivism, the Torah approach, Judaism's approach, is not about living a purely individualistic life and not about living a purely communal life, but rather about finding the harmony and the balance between the two. And what he points out is that we have to have an identity as an individual, but we also have to realize that as an individual, we belong to a greater whole. And whether that is our families, our communities, later it will be our shevet, our tribe, this identity as part of a larger whole, this sense of unity, achdut, connection, is extremely important. And ultimately, both the community and the individual are under Hashem, are serving a higher purpose. And what he points out is that this generation was trying to live a life where they were negating Hashem, they were negating God, they were negating the individual, and they were purely focused on the sense of community, purely focused on the achdut, on the unity. And he says that unity is a very, very powerful thing. And that's how this generation was able to build up so much strength and support. However, a sense of unity, a sense of achdut, that negates the individual or negates Hashem does not deserve to exist. And ultimately, he has a unique way of understanding what it means that they started speaking different languages. Rav Hirsch points out that Hashem caused them to reach into their own individuality and not want to be part of this community anymore, which ultimately created all the different languages and the separation. And I was thinking about these verses, and I saw a midrash. The midrash says, Avos Reb Nosson says that at the time of the Tower of Babel, if a stone broke, when they were building this tower, if a stone broke, they would cry about the stone the way we cry on the loss of a human being. And as Rav Hirsch explains, they were trying to build this edifice, this like he compares it to like a pyramid. They were trying to build this tremendous pyramid that would somehow outlast Hashem. They wouldn't need God. that if we had such a sense of unity and connection, and we built this whole city and this whole society as a communal entity, we wouldn't need to have a higher purpose. We wouldn't need Hashem, and we wouldn't need the individual. And as he points out, a community that negates the individual and negates Hashem doesn't deserve to exist. I was thinking that in our times, in recent history, the most similar thing to this would be, I would think, communism or socialism. Communism was built on the concept of achdut. It was even had some strong, unfortunately, some strong Jewish roots to it. And it was built on the concept of if we all together, if we're all unit, if we're all unity, if we're all together as one, then we don't need a Hashem and we don't need an individual. The individuality doesn't have to exist. And of course, we know that it didn't work out very well. But interestingly enough, Rav Hirsch points out that when it came time for this society to be broken apart, because it was built on a true concept of achdut, of unity, even though it was a unity that cannot continue to exist, they didn't deserve to be punished as individuals, and they just split apart. And I think it's interesting that when socialism and communism fell apart, also there were no deaths. There was a lot of deaths in the 20th century, but when communism fell apart, each part of the USSR just became a different stand, a different division, wanted to have their own identity, but the sense of but nobody was punished as an individual as communism was broken up. And I saw a beautiful midrash that it says that if you want to know the metaphor for peace, if you want to know the metaphor for peace, there's three things that are symbolic of the metaphor for peace. It says a river, a kettle, and a bird. Now, a river is understandable that this is a metaphor for peace. It flows, it's calming, it's all connected. But what about the bird? Why is a bird a metaphor for peace? So I saw a beautiful explanation that if I were to take you to someone's home and you saw everybody getting along, a tremendous sense of unity, is this a house of unity? Is this a house of shalom? And the answer is you don't really know, because maybe it's a home where somebody speaks out, if somebody says something, their own opinion, they get zapped, they get destroyed. And in that sense, there's no individuals in this house. It's just a sense of community. So the bird is a metaphor of individuality. Each bird has its own wings, each bird flies on its own, but yet they also fly together in groups. And there is definitely a peacefulness to the bird, but it has an individuality. And the concept is that if we want to have true shalom, true peace, it can't just be the peace of the river. It also has to be a peace of the bird, a bird which has its own individuality and yet gets along. Then ultimately, the kettle. What's the metaphor of the kettle? So a kettle takes two opposites. It takes fire and takes water, two things that never can get along in the natural world. And the kettle actually allows the water to be boiled by the fire, allows the fire to boil the water without the water putting out the fire. And this is the ultimate metaphor for peace. When we're able to grow from each other, to learn from each other, to build on each other without putting each other out. And I believe this is what the Torah really wants from us. When the Torah tells us that our individuality is so important, but we're also part of a larger community. But as Rav Hirsch points out, the larger community has to build up the individuals. And this is true in every part of our community, whether it's in our families, whether it's in our shuls, whether it's in our larger communities. The community has to build up the individuality, not squash the individuality. The community has to build up the individuality, but ultimately with the realization that both the individual and the community are under Hashem. We're serving a higher purpose. And when we're able to have this balancing act, so to speak, of the individual, the community, and both realizing that we're under Hashem, we're able to have and reach our true purpose and mission in life. My prayer to all of you is that we are able to find our own individuality and at the same time be able to connect as one community with tremendous achdut and unity, and Bezrat Hashem see Mashiach speedily in our days. Shabbat Shalom.